For a lot of my gaming life, RPGs was something I necessarily hadn't got into, to the point I find even hard to define or differentiate from other genres. Are they just fantasy games with dragons, elves and so on? Can they possibly be connected to or defined as adventure games because you're playing a role? Well, both of those aspects are not necessarily true. While fantasy is a mostly common backdrop for an RPG, considering the genre's roots in tabletop gaming / Dungeons & Dragons, and adventure games also tend to share the genre's general potential for character and story development, RPGs tend to be more about customization of one or more party members, combat that gives you experience points and more items and abilities, and a series of quests that are either part of an overarching story or are optional. Plus, they tend to be lengthy. Very lengthy. But what is my experience with this genre? How did I get into them? Have I only just scratched the surface? And how can you get into them, considering their potentially lengthy and overwhelming nature? Well, I'll attempt to answer these last few questions in this video, and hopefully gain some experience points along the way. How did I get into them? Well, it was a gradual process, considering I didn't really know what an RPG was to begin with. I remember my cousins being obsessed, for the most part, with the Heroes of Might and Magic series, namely 2 and 3. It wasn't Civilization or even Fire Emblem, but these games, where I understood the origin of just one more turn, turning into... whoops. I remember having my own copy of Heroes of Might and Magic 3. That's how much I was interested in it. It would crash sometimes though, so it was annoying to have to boot up the game again just to have one more turn. Still, the mechanics that were easy to understand yet difficult to master for proper strategy were good, and the hot seat multiplayer made for a great time. As of this video, maybe I actually need to finish this game properly, especially since I spent more time back then playing Pokemon, or more specifically Pokemon Blue. I got into Pokemon by watching the anime, which may as well have been a vague bandwagon riding moment. Then at roughly the same time, there were Game Boy games of Pokemon being played by many a young person. I got more so into the spin-off games, and yet didn't have a Game Boy. So the only way I could play Pokemon Blue was via the transfer pack on the TV with Pokemon Stadium on the Nintendo 64. Anyways, I didn't really know Pokemon Blue was an RPG. You catch a variety of Pocket Monsters, choose to customize which ones you want, and level them up through combat. Seriously, all those times I was looking at how much experience points each of my Pokemon had, I was actually experiencing an RPG without realizing it. I played bits of the other Pokemon games down the track. When I did lists of favorite games with people, I was reminded of Heroes of Might and Magic and even Baldur's Gate, which I haven't played, let alone reviewed. Aside from playing Mario & Luigi Superstar Saga, and bits of the Elder Scrolls games, namely Morrowind, that game blew me away back then. I should go back to play it again. I didn't really pay attention to RPGs, including the ones that I knew were receiving praise. Then, in 2012, something changed. It was a mostly impulsive purchase on the Virtual Console of a game that was, and quite possibly still is, regarded very highly. Even reading the manual quickly gave me a good sense of how it could be compelling. It's a game that I've already reviewed on my channel as a special video. It is... Chrono Trigger. There's so much I could say about this game, so you're better off watching my review of it. I expected the game to be good, but it was better than that. I played it at an emotional time in my life as well. Basically, its gameplay mechanics, its story, and its old yet still good production values, including quite possibly my favourite soundtrack in video games, got me more interested in the genre. But before I go on talking about that next stage of the journey, there's a few key things I have to mention about Chrono Trigger that I surely already mentioned in my review that make it a good first game for those new to RPGs or even JRPGs or Japanese role-playing games. The game is shorter than a lot of other RPGs, with a casual playthrough taking approximately 20 to 25 hours to complete. This doesn't include New Game Plus and multiple endings. It's somewhat easier than other games, the mechanics are mostly easier to understand than other similar games, and the game is well paced. I thought, because I liked Chrono Trigger so much, I should give the Final Fantasy series a go. That's a series that I've vaguely heard about for years. My first one was Final Fantasy VI, aka Final Fantasy III, which is also on the Super Nintendo. I also decided to play Final Fantasy VII at roughly the same time as well. It's fair to say I've started getting into the series, and I'm still gradually going through it. I've yet to decide which Final Fantasy is the best starting point of the series. We can talk about that in the comments. I've completed 4, 6, and 7, and played bits of 1, 9, 12, and 15. Plus I'm slowly going through the DS version of 4, and I guess I can thank Chrono Trigger for making me even more interested in the overall genre. Sure, there are games that can be overwhelming or hard to figure out or follow sometimes, plus they tend to be long. But at least that's why there are games like Super Mario RPG or Paper Mario, right? I can say that, having reviewed them. I may have only just scratched the surface, considering which Final Fantasy games I've played at this moment. I've only played a little bit of certain games such as Planescape Torment, Golden Sun, Chrono Cross, Octopath Traveler, Fallout, Secret of Mana, the other Elder Scrolls games, Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic, and Fire Emblem Awakening. I haven't played Three Houses yet, but it actually does look pretty cool. And how can we forget games that contain RPG elements, like the Legend of Zelda series or even Deus Ex? Plus there's the mother games such as Earthbound, and the Kingdom Hearts games I've played. I even reviewed Persona 5 to celebrate 2 years of this channel. That was a long review, huh? So, if you haven't really played RPGs before or are not necessarily sure about them, where does one start? Well, I'll have to answer this based on my experiences of the games I played. For ease, simplicity and short length, for Mario RPGs, such as Super Mario RPG and the early Paper Mario and Mario Luigi games are good ones. Plus it's got Mario as well. I think Earthbound is probably not too bad either, but it's a bit strange and there are a few difficulty spikes. These are mostly retro choices, which also applies to Pokemon, Chrono Trigger, and quite possibly, with reasonable expectations based on hype, even Final Fantasy VII, which has less characters and items to customize than Final Fantasy VI, for example. Whether that works or not is something I will discuss or review down the line. Also, Final Fantasy VII is getting a remake in 2020. Maybe that could be your first RPG. That's where I ask you the questions. What was your first RPG? What do you think is a good first RPG? What is your favorite RPG or RPG series? What makes a good RPG? That's a lot of questions to answer. Maybe that's overwhelming, like an RPG could be, huh? I hope to answer these questions and then some this month of September. I want to discuss topics such as tutorials and storytelling, which will include other genres, and review Kingdom Hearts Birth by Sleep, as well as do a review or discussion of a low-budget-ish Steam game, Mr. Triangle's Adventure, a game that was requested months ago. That should provide a good opportunity to analyse what works or doesn't in an RPG, amongst other things. It makes it all the more exciting to play indie RPGs, such as the upcoming Kickstarter-funded Kingdoms of the Dump, which is not coming out until maybe 2022, but still. So, have a good day or night or whatever it is, and I'll see you for my next video, after I've done some grinding and side quests. Bye!